Welcome everyone for the first evening of TLD 2022, Creating a Learning Oasis. My name is Keith Patterson. I am the director of the Teaching with Primary Sources Western Region, and I'm going to act as a bit of your host today. We're doing a little less than traditional Keynote tonight, and what we're going to do the rest of the week. Since it was President's Day, and we realize that maybe you're not watching this at the traditional time slot, maybe watching this later. So this will be available to watch, and we actually are just bringing the most of our TPS Western Region team in to just have a nice reflection about teaching President's Day and some different resources about presidents and first ladies. And we're going to do this kind of in a roundtable, free-form format where we're just going to go around and look at some different angles on presidents and first ladies, and then just reflect on some different stories and some different teaching ideas, just kind of give you an idea to kind of sit back and listen to our conversation about President's Day and presidents and first ladies. And so with that, I want to have the team introduce themselves. And so I'm going to kick it over to our executive director, Dr. Peggy O'Neill-Jones, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Well, and thank you for coming to TLD. I'm Peggy O'Neill-Jones, and as Keith said, I'm the executive director for the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources Western Region. Sherry, I think you're next.
Okay, I'm Sherry Galloway. I'm a retired middle school librarian, and been working with primary sources with the Library of Congress for a long time. I guess I would have to do the math, but welcome.
Cindy, you're...
Hi, I'm Cindy Stout, and I'm a historian. That's why they let me have the books. I'm also the books in the background, because I'm also technologically challenged. But I have worked with TLD and with the TPS for many, many years. And each year, this is more exciting than the last. So is that Laura next?
Sure, I'm Laura Israelson, and I'm excited to be here with you at TLD this week too. So fun. We just keep pushing through even virtually. So we've enjoyed it. I've been working with the Library of Congress. I love this team, and I've been working as a librarian, but right now I'm working in 2 middle schools as a digital coach. So I bring some of that to the team. Michelle?
And I'm Michelle Pearson. I'm a middle school educator and a tech geek, the other half of 2 geeky teachers with Laura, but TLD has always been a very special place in my heart, as well as working with the Library of Congress and primary sources. It's been the heart of my classroom, but also a very special place to learn and grow as well. And I hope that this is going to be an opportunity for all of us to grow together this week, whether live or virtually, when we can manage our app or pop into a presentation and maybe get some new teaching ideas, and also some ideas about things that we can explore in our own inquiry as a teacher leader as well. Kyle, I'm going to push it back to you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. My name's Kyle Claiborne. I'm the senior project manager for the TPS Western Region, and I teach at MSU Denver in the journalism department as well. I'm just excited to bring you all these amazing resources that we have, not just for presidents, but for throughout the week. So thanks everybody for being here. And to start this discussion off, I'm going to pass it back over to Peggy to start the discussion on John F. Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy Onassis.
Well, one of the ways I thought that we might start talking about presidents is the media, not only how the media affected their presidency, but how their presidency affected the media. So the debates between Nixon and Kennedy are pretty well known. That Kennedy, of course, was far more glamorous and came off. Television really made him. But the part that I want to talk about is the Kennedy assassination. So when you think about television, that it was only it was an infant in the 1950s, definitely a brand new medium. So when Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. The media, television's ability to go on and cover this event almost 24/7 live, they had never done it before. So they were throwing together technology they'd never tested, and it was going live. And it was really technologically miracle that it all happened. But even more than that, more than the technological ability to do that, but it gave Americans access to a time of grief that they'd really never been to or been able to see up and close. So for example, during the week basically of the Kennedy assassination, a very respected newsman, he became emotional and he cried on live TV. That didn't happen. Jackie Kennedy walking with her husband's coffin with blood on her skirt. These are all things that, remember, they were so shocking because at the time, America was looking at television shows like Gilligan's Island and Dick Van Dyke and Andy Griffith, everything very clean and whitewashed, and suddenly they're looking at this. Carolyn Kennedy reaches under the flag to touch her father's coffin. Who forgets John Jr. saluting his father? The shooting of Oswald was a live homicide on TV. People didn't realize what they had just seen. And of course, television had no way to black it out, but it was shocking. And then of course, lighting the eternal flame. So when we think about the media, that also on Jackie's side, Jackie was glamorous. She knew how, she was a photographer. She knew how to play the media. She knew how to play in front of the media, and she knew how to use the media to get things done. So maybe I'm just going to ask the others now, thoughts that you have, or other things that you can add to presidents in the media.
I'd love to jump in on the Jackie piece as well. And, you know, Peggy, thank you for talking about Kennedy. I think that Kennedy was a charismatic person. Jackie was a little more soft-spoken, but very firm. We know that she used TV to her advantage as well in the White House, as she took the time to really reach out to the community to show what her work had been. One of the first ladies to actually focus on a huge project, and that was the restoration of our White House, which was really a key turning point in the understanding of historic preservation, but also the honor of the White House itself being the presidential home. She worked with it throughout her life, but really launched that whole endeavor through personal connections, people that they had met through media connections, her newspaper work. She had a keen eye for photography that helped her work with the White House Historical Association today, which was an organization she established to preserve and protect the White House. And that eye that she had for decorating, for bringing the historic furnishings and items back to the White House played a huge role. When she stepped out after Kennedy was assassinated, she continued to build that legacy, working with people to establish the Kennedy Center, as well as their presidential library. In fact, there are many different primary sources that are associated with their presidency. Although they have the presidential library, their presidency has some hallmark pieces, including letters from Jackie to I.M. Pei about the establishment and the design of the presidential library. So two very similar people working with the media, but two also different personalities who helped bring to light some important changes, and I guess illuminate a Camelot, as we always hear, you know, that knew what people viewed as a perfect place. We know now history tells a little bit different story, but at the same time, the Library of Congress holds a lot to tell the broader story with this presidential couple.
And just one quick thing, Michelle, Jackie also brought a camera into the White House to show her refurbishing efforts. And so it was a way to bring the public into the White House, which they never were able to do.
Absolutely. And she created that first White House guidebook, which today is still published in that format and that honor that was started. Hers had the very first one. And today, those photographs, that camera that came in, both as television and as print, really showed that you can work the two together to tell a story.
You know, I'm going to jump. Go ahead. Go ahead.
when you're searching the Library of Congress collections for images and resources around the Kennedy presidency, you might run into the fact that some of them are not items that you can open off-site, because there is a presidential library. All those papers went to the Kennedy Library. The Library of Congress has the papers of 23 presidents, but Kennedy is not one of them. And so that might be something that you'll have to keep in mind as you're searching for resources that you might use from this time period.
Yeah, and with that in mind, Sherry, I just wanted to mention that these images you see here are from the Library of Congress, and that we've created a companion document that's going to kind of be a guide for what we're talking about today, as well as it's got a big long list of brain dump basically of presidential resources from your team here. And so things you're seeing here, like if you're asking yourself, where did you find these? It's like we have those linked out so you know what to do with them. Like I said, some of these are really interesting, some of the political cartoons and family photographs. So there is some stuff there. And the stuff that's not there, we have links out to where to find that at other repositories. So
Laura, were you going to say something?
You know, I think she did struggle with how to create that relationship with the media, because we even have her, hear her saying, I don't know what my hairstyle has to do with my husband's ability to be president. So I think there were some times as she was serving as First Lady that maybe the media got too close, or she was a little frustrated. But I also remember how influential she was. I remember my aunts sitting around the table at my grandmother's house talking about whether or not Jackie O would have worn that, or what she wore, or how she did her hair. And so she was very influential at the time, but I think her influence is still felt today. But I think she sometimes used that to her advantage, but then I think maybe sometimes it bothered her that there was so much focus on that. And I think all of our first ladies and presidents struggle with that. You know, why does it matter what I'm wearing or what I'm doing? But she really did have that kind of class. When they went to France, and he introduces himself as the husband of Jackie Kennedy because he thinks she's more popular with the French than he is. So that was interesting too, that she had this great relationship and she was able to utilize, maybe the media or what was going on in the world in terms of those relationships. Sometimes we don't always understand the influence of these first ladies. I was reading, because Sherry mentioned The Founding Mothers by Cokie Roberts, so I've been listening to that and really thinking differently about the women who were married to all these presidents through time and how they were left to take care of everything. And she was too, right? Even after his death, think of the things that she was left to take care of. So
yeah.
Well, and I can remember when it was announced that she married Aristotle Onassis, and I was in school, and one of my teachers was just incensed that this classy woman who was married to this Camelot king would marry Aristotle Onassis.
Yeah, well, and part of that, she and her children felt followed. I mean, she brought the paparazzi suit against, I forget his name, but so she brought a suit against a photographer who would just not leave them alone. And part of the reason with Onassis was he had the money to secure them. And I remember that when Hillary Clinton, when she was taking over as First Lady, when Clinton was elected, she went to Jackie for advice and she said, do not let your children be photographed. I felt like my children, I gave away their privacy, and that people began to feel like my children were their children. And as you notice, from that, the children from then on, Chelsea and others, they were pretty protected from photographers. So
well, Peggy, you mentioned that. I think that a lot of the first ladies went to Mrs. Kennedy to speak about that. I know the Carter administration was the same with Amy.
Yeah.
And, she was also known for her elegant notes, her handwriting, her letters that she sent even after. And we do know that there's recorded visits of her coming back, especially when the presidential portraits were presented to the White House. And she always had a focus on her children and how the media interpreted that family life. You're absolutely right.
Well, how about another president and media?
Well, FDR used the radio unlike any other president prior to or since, actually, in his fireside chats. It was a way to directly connect to the people in the US who were struggling with depression and then later war, to let them feel connected to the decisions that were being made.
Well, and radio was also, it was one of the first technologies that brought it into your living room. So they, again, earlier you would have to go out and listen to a speech or you would read something in the newspaper, but the advent of radio, precursor to television, but radio came in your living room. You all sat, you see the pictures. In fact, there probably are some on the library of families gathered around a radio listening to FDR and his fireside chats. And then the other thing is the way that it was able to personalize what his messages were. It's like you're sitting at the kitchen table having a chat with Franklin about how things were going. And it was a powerful tool. And just like Kennedy used TV, well, Franklin certainly saw the power of radio.
Well, and Eleanor also used radio, and she continued to use radio throughout her tenure discussing human rights, working with the United Nations and all of those pieces. And I think that she saw the power of that radio piece throughout his tenure. But I think the other piece that Franklin and Eleanor had, they really embraced the technology of their time period too. And I think that media, we think of radio and TV, but we also need to think of how did they use the technology of their time. Print matter was huge. They were very much about billboards. They were very much about broadsides. They were very much about train car signs, especially in their cross-country train trips, some of which that came through Colorado, just like Theodore Roosevelt as well. And FDR used that train opportunity to meet with his constituency, giving a face to what then they heard on the radio. So it was a connection of that personal look with his speeches and his placement in a car, on a train. He was very particular about his cars. He wanted an open car. He wanted to be able to be seated. He loved motoring out in his car to be able to see the community, to be able to engage. They talk about that a lot, especially when he was in the hot springs as well. And then even after his death, they did, of course, bring his body back on a train and made those stops all the way up to Washington, D.C. And again, it used the opportunity to connect the person to the community, because everybody had heard him, and hearing him and seeing him put the two together.
A side anecdote about radio, when radio shows were beginning to go over to TV, for example, Zorro and others. So when they said, so how do you like Zorro on TV as opposed to radio? Well, there's the theater of the mind where you can imagine things that, and so when they asked, how do you like Zorro on TV as opposed to radio? They said, well, not as well, because the pictures aren't as good. So the Zorro they casted on TV was not my Zorro. So that just kind of falls into the same thing that as they listened to Franklin, I mean you had the theater of your own mind about where he was sitting, what he was doing, things like that.
Well, and Eleanor also wrote a column for many years called My Day, and it gave a look, again, another glimpse into the White House, into what was going on. And she used it to to express her concerns over things like the United Nations and so forth. So to really educate people through print media.
It's an interesting thing to think about the radio and you have a captured audience. Even early TV with Kennedy, presidents had this captured audience. There's been a lot of discussion now about how do we don't just collectively as a whole United States sit down in front of the same radio and listen to the same station or listen to the same news program at night. So it's interesting the progression and where people now get their news. But they did have, I mean, you think of when he was president during the Great Depression, like what a powerful tool that was to get everybody together and maybe give some hope to everyone at the same time. So but it's interesting to think about where we are now and how we're harnessing media and how do you have that same message to everyone at the same time.
And I think one of the things that was powerful about Eleanor and Franklin is that to hear their voice, as opposed to reading about it in the newspaper, to actually hear the intonation. They had very distinctive voices and very distinctive delivery styles, which I think translated really well on the radio. And that whole format of how you communicate was a good lesson for anyone who wants to be in public speaking, but especially for presidents who try to connect to everybody in the country. And that was interesting to me.
Any other thoughts on FDR? Kyle, you were going to do the facilitating. So why don't do you want to take over from here?
Sure. No, that's great. We can go to the next one. I will just say too that there's tons of other Franklin Roosevelt primary sources on the Library of Congress, and he has some of the most amazing audio clips that you can listen to on the library as well.
Yeah, and on that note, Kyle, it's talking about media and stuff. We have some interesting resources. We can link them in there about primary source analysis in different formats, and we're going to do some afternoon sessions about working with different media formats. This would be interesting to look at some of these fireside chats and recordings, and use some different techniques to do some primary source analysis with listening skills. And so we can share some information about that. It's a whole nother topic for another day, but yeah, there's some interesting things about media and consuming and visual media versus auditory media versus print media, and how that affects the medium and the message, and how that comes across, and how that's been used over different time by different presidents and different people. And like you're saying, Laura, it's when you're looking at the media, and we're all sort of, whether we formally did it or not, we all are students of the media and consumers of media. So we have to, that's something that's really interesting to look at through primary sources.
I think that's a connection to our students though. And as we stay thoughtful about how we're bringing this to the classroom, to bring primary sources in an auditory format, a lot of us we gravitate towards the image or the map or the print. And to bring an auditory or a visual piece is really important. But I think it also connects to our kids who are connected to their phones and are connected to the TV and are connected to those pieces anyhow. I think that they can really connect here. And when you're talking about these media challenges of celebrations, opportunities, there's lots of words I could use there, that kids really can kind of connect and feel a one-on-one, and that really can engage them. And when we're looking in bringing the classroom together to engage in conversation around inquiry, media is a good topic because our kids face it every day. And we know they face it. We talk about it as teachers, but wouldn't it be interesting to continue to bring this conversation in a cyclical format throughout the year to talk about all these different things, because we can go all the way back to the Revolution. I think back to Ben Franklin, join or die. I think how Washington used his medium of media, and our presidents all up the line. I think that it goes back to what Peggy said and what we've discussed, that media is there. We're not going to get rid of it, so we might as well engage with it. And so maybe this is the way to bring that back to the classroom.
Totally agree. I mean, that's something we we are constantly looking at and the different formats that people have used to communicate. And I think the office of the American president is a great lens for it, because they always have to be on the cutting edge of the way they communicate with their constituents, because like it or not, in our country, they have to, they have to stay in touch with the people in order to get elected and stay in office. So, I mean, and the great thing is Library of Congress, at least for most of the time we've had a president, they have a lot of material in that whole conversation in the media and things that we can look at for evidence to make claims about history and about US history and all sorts of things. So yeah, it's just a great conversation and a great tool and a great resource to explore history and how it's communicated to the public. It's just such a great resource for all of us.
And I don't think it's just oh, go ahead.
Nope,
It even goes back to campaigning. Like, it's usually, the victor is the one who mastered the media, right? Even President Obama, he saw the power of Twitter and was able to grab that, and they attribute a lot of his success to that. So if you go back and study who won, often that can go back to how did they use the media of their day.
Great point.
Well, and I think even our littles, as we talk about this, it's easy to talk about civic conversation, government, all those different pieces. But I think even our littlest guys in the classroom can have conversation about media and what they interpret and what they think. And I think it's a good conversation also about digital footprint for them, to understand what are they creating, what's the media they're creating. And I have seen it happen, but I would say a first, second, and third grader can talk about that. And I think using primary sources as that conversation point brings back that whole conversation about what does it mean to be a citizen, to be an elected representative, to be somebody who is engaging with media, but also maybe creating it too. And I think that that's a huge classroom discussion from our shortest ones in kindergarten all the way up to higher ed. I think it needs to be a continuum.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, and if you need more help with that, the TPS program in our office or our partners throughout the country are all exploring this and have got lots of resources. And Sherry, I'll let you.
I was just going to say, in keeping in mind bias and point of view, one of the really powerful ones was from newspaper articles during Lincoln's time. And if you looked at newspaper articles that were published from the South and how they reported an event and then how it was reported in the North, it's a pretty very distinct difference of that. So I think that's another point that we can keep in mind. And hopefully the Library of Congress has had in their collections representation from different points of view, and it can be helpful to look at bias. Political cartoons is another really good one that can be used in a lot of different ways. And there's tons of those for the president. So that's another one that's good to keep in mind.
Well, let's get to Teddy. How'd he use the media?
Yeah, another example of a master of media, right?
Who's going to take Teddy?
Oh, I'll start. I love Teddy Roosevelt, and I think it started because I had a personal connection to him. I'll just own it. As a 13 and 14-year-old, my mother was hauling me into the Smithsonian, and I was there the day that his teddy bear walked in. And we got a phone call down at the front desk, and it was one of the Roosevelt family members. And we went down with the curators, and I'll be darned, it was a Roosevelt family member who brought the teddy bear from the family, who duly told our Mr. Rubenstein and the team that he was instructed to drop it off only to a curator. And I remember how excited we were to have the teddy bear walk in. The teddy bear is now on exhibit in the presidential exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution. And it started for us exploration of our own inquiry to learn about Teddy Roosevelt. And the Library of Congress has a huge repository of his papers and his family papers, including some diaries that aren't digitized, that I'm going to put a plug here. Get your Library of Congress card, go to Washington, D.C., and go ask for the papers. Go ask for Archibald Roosevelt's autograph book Archie's autographs, which we used many, many years ago. But you can have that brought out. We think of all the digital collections that are at the Library of Congress, but what a national repository to go back and actually see these collections and these diaries and these letters. He was an amazing man who wrote to his family, and he has, to go back to what Sherry was mentioning about voices, one of the squeakiest voices I think I've ever heard on audio in movie. He has a very high-pitched voice that I don't know. I look at him and I don't think of him as having that voice. And of course, it was a different technology at that time, right? But he really used media to his advantage to go back into the conversation about print media and to think about the video that was then being made and the audio. But his wife had a role in that too. And his second wife, who was with him in the White House with all of the menagerie, the animals, the everything extra that came along with Theodore Roosevelt, including the pony and the snakes and the hamster and the parrot and the dog, everything else. You can see the dog right in our picture here. She also was very thoughtful about how the family in the White House was portrayed. And she worked with Theodore Roosevelt. And we know that she encouraged him to bring Frances Benjamin Johnson in to be the first woman photographer of a president. And we have many beautiful stereopticon cards and stereoscope cards that show family pictures like the ones you see here, and some that we'll reference in our resources that give us a glimpse into the first family's life. Some fun, some serious, some very presidential. So I think behind the scenes, she was also working with media in regards to photography. And I know, Peggy, I know you've got photography lens with this too as a photographer. And that was pretty special to have a woman that was photographing the president. And I think that was pretty neat.
Well, even look at the image on the left of the screen. I mean, she was clearly making a statement. That was, it's not only posed, but the clothing that was chosen and all of that. I mean, that's an eye, and that gave an image that they wanted to project. If you look at some of the earlier family photos that didn't have professional photographers, I mean, you can certainly compare that, that just in terms of the image that that they projected to the American people. And apparently Edith Roosevelt knew that, understood that, knew how to play that angle.
Absolutely. And I think Teddy engaged it later. There's a stereopticon card of him standing with a globe in what we now know as the war room or the cabinet room. It was called both at that time. And he was very particular about having that globe on that table with that chair, because he wanted to show himself not only as a United States leader, but also as a global leader. And so he made that choice with Frances Johnson.
Cindy, you're the historian. Pop in with Teddy Roosevelt. What's your antidote on him?
Well, Teddy is absolutely amazing. And I was always interested in many of his travels, where he was in the Amazon, he was all over in Africa. So he really truly was a worldwide known individual, as well as someone known here, well known here in the US. And he, when he was Secretary of the Navy, he would wait until McKinley got busy doing something, or not McKinley, but anyway, yeah, McKinley was busy doing something, and he would go off and do things overseas. So he was very interested in the US and our influence on the world. Take note of the Panama Canal, for example.
So Sherry, when you were working at the library, so Sherry actually worked at the library for several years. What was your favorite or your most impressed, what Teddy Roosevelt primary source really impressed you?
Well, I need to tell you, and it's thanks to Peggy that I was at the Library of Congress. I attended a TLD session and learned about the teacher in residence program, and then went to DC. And quite often we would have teacher groups come in and we would take tours, and we were in the stacks of the manuscript division with one of the curators, and he says, oh, here are the Teddy Roosevelt papers, which they have not only his presidential papers, but his early papers and documents, and also a diary. And so he pulls out this little diary and opens it up to a certain page and asks one of the ladies in the group to read it. And there's a big X, and he says, the light in my life has gone out. Well, that happened to be the day that his mother died and his wife died in childbirth, the same exact day, which was February 14th, ironically. But to see that human side and the struggles and the depression and the challenges that he faced as a young man, and then went on and became well known around the world and the country as well, and then became president. And then on the flip side, there's also documents that were letters that he had written to his children with little diagrams and a little fable and little pictures of men on horses, and just really quite touching glimpse into what he was like as a father and what he was like as a man in private. So I think the papers, you might not think would be that interesting, but they can really show you the facade that maybe is hidden in the media or hidden from the public.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Sharon. That just, as you're telling that story, I just look at that other primary source that's up on the screen with the one man in his time plays many parts. And so you see all these faces, and you kind of, as you hear the stories, you search for the face that might match the story. It always reminds me of what turned out to not be a legitimate primary source, but for years in our office, I remember we did years and years ago, we did a colloquium in Denver that featured Teddy Roosevelt as a focal point for water in the West many years ago. And so we were looking for primary sources around it. And I remember in our searches, I came across, not at the library, which was the first indicator that it might have issues, a picture of Teddy Roosevelt riding a moose across a lake. And so he had enough mythos around him that you'd almost believe that that was true. So I remember spending time trying to, prove or disprove that particular source. And so was it really true that he did that? Because you almost believe that he actually could have done that, and may have actually done that. So there's so many stories between, his time with the Rough Riders and I know there's a story when that's actually true, that when he's out campaigning that he got shot or shot right before, and then went on ahead anyways, and then had something wry to say about the whole situation. Probably, Cindy, you probably know more about that than I do. Remember, just interesting stories around his image, like that's like in this primary source here.
Amazing. And you look at, he was a conservationist.
Oh yeah.
A historian. I mean, he was really a Renaissance man.
Always a book in his pocket, or a book somewhere, always a book somewhere. Even riding with the Rough Riders, or even out in North Dakota, he had a book in his saddle.
I think it would be amazing to take this primary source and give it to students and have them select one of the Roosevelt faces and tell a story and write about it, to research it and find out what's representative in this primary source and what story can you attach to it. And then maybe find another primary source that illuminates that to match this particular poster here with all the different hats that he wears, right? With the stories of Roosevelt himself, because we're talking all of these anecdotal pieces, but wouldn't it be a really neat research piece, an inquiry piece for kids to dive into his stories, to listen to the audio, to read his letters, and connect a primary source to each one of the faces that's on the poster.
Yeah. As you say that, as an aside, so I see him riding the horse there, and all I could think about is the movies Not in a Museum, where Robin Williams played him. As as a very enduring character in that movie, if anybody remembers that. But yeah.
Controversy about that statue, right?
Yeah.
Well, they just removed it. They just removed it. So Lots
The
of
other thing I
controversy.
like to connect to kids is how did Teddy influence you? Because he doubled the national park system. I mean, there are national parks, Mesa Verde, Grand Canyon, national parks close to us. I lived near Crater Lake once, and so all that goes back to he used executive orders and all kinds of things to at the time to double the national park system and to see that need. And but that ties to our kids today, like you have this because, so to have them do a little research around what difference did Teddy Roosevelt make for you?
Well, and I think to dig down even further, Laura, because the park is amazing and that's part of it, but he was part of the Antiquities Act, which is about national landmarks, not just, the parks as well. So, it's interesting because in a state to have a child, they may say, I don't have a national park near me. But if you say, do you have a historic landmark or something important, they can connect to those landmarks as well. And Teddy was responsible for that. You are absolutely spot on. I think something too, I think a lot of kids don't realize how varied his life was and that he was a risk taker. We as adults read about him and think about that, but there's a lot of conversation around persistence and resilience and risk taking and thoughtfulness and frankly, risky behavior. He takes off out into the Amazon. You could use a lot of key words for Teddy Roosevelt. And it's a neat conversation to say, how was he a leader, but also how was he a person? And how were those two pieces together? And that would be some neat conversation starters with kids. And I could see that being a conversation starter again around this primary source right here.
I wonder about looking at what he did as president and then trying to trace back what in his life led that to be important to him. Was it as a child what he did or where he went or those kinds of places that were powerful to him? And that's why he was really invested in the Antiquities Act. I think when we look at powerful people, it's often those little pieces that happened in their childhood or when they were young people, or even negative experiences or positive experiences that become issues for them. And we can look at all of our presidents and I think look back at trying to figure out and trace where did that become a passionate motivator for them.
Well, and to trace that even around that, Eleanor Roosevelt was his favorite niece.
Yes.
Well, there's an inquiry process too, because I don't know that I've ever looked for letters at the end of his presidency or after that show his reflections on his presidency. I mean, do you, Cynthia? I don't know, Cindy, do you know? Do you all know? That would be a question for me to dive in. I've read a lot about him. I've read a lot of books with him, but I haven't dug into the primary sources as much that were his reflections about his work. And I wonder if they're out there.
Well, and I think then his comeback in the People's Party.
Yeah.
I mean, Taft was the one he chose to follow him, but he became very unhappy with what Taft was doing. So he ran again, thinking he could get a third term.
Help me tell this story, but I want to bring it full circle and bring Teddy back to the media because he would go hide, right? He'd go down the street to Old Ebbett's Grill where all of where now the animal heads from a lot of his hunting trips still hang. And he would kind of hide, and the media or people who were trying to find him would figure out he was there and then come and wait for him in the lobby. And they'd like to tell that story at Old Ebbett's Grill and tell you that's where lobbying comes from. But that was an interesting relationship that he had with the media too.
Well, and that lobbying conversation also comes back to the Willard Hotel and the Round Robin and the presidents that used to sit there. Grant, in particular, smoking a cigar and having a drink, and people would lobby him. But it's that cross between when do people use media and when do people want that privacy? right? I think after his first wife passed away, he, left his daughter, went out west, went to North Dakota, and was out there in the wilds, away from everything, away from society, away from everything he was used to in New York. And then he had to come back to it, and then started running for office and doing all those pieces. And I have to wonder about those transitions for him. And I think all of the leaders we've spoke about have a certain transition or a certain line that they may or may not have drawn between their personal life and their professional life, right? And I think some of our primary sources show that.
In North Dakota, they do have a sign that his presidency started in North Dakota.
Yeah.
His reflection, his thinking, what he did, that, or something about, or North Dakota was where his presidency, began, or something like that. But they take credit for that.
I have a comment too about the presidential children. Alice, who was his daughter with his first wife, and the wife died in childbirth. Alice was quite a character, and she was a teenager, young adult, I think, when he was in the White House, and she was always in the newspaper, and the press kept saying, "What are you going to do about Alice?" And he said, "I can either run the country or I can control Alice. I'm going to run the country."
Can't do both.
But again, how the press handles your family, how it handles the issues, and how you deal with that. Also, I wanted to mention your comment about Old Ebbitt's Grill and the Willard Hotel. They're in the same block, so they probably could have been somehow connected. They snuck out the back door of Old Ebbitt's and went into the Willard, perhaps. But
Yep.
But it goes back to the importance of place. Perhaps his time in the West influenced him, and that's why he felt so prone to save it and to do all he could to set more land aside, because he felt like maybe that was a place where he could go and reset, or find himself again. Or
the story that I think about that, he took a train out west. I think one of the first presidents to actually go out west. Well, he came upon the Grand Canyon having never seen a picture of it. So if you can imagine how stunningly beautiful the Grand Canyon is, and you usually have seen the images, so you're somewhat prepared. But the story is, when he came upon the Grand Canyon, he said, "We've got to save this," and national parks. He was just so blown away by the magnificence and the beauty of it.
Well, and I think about the picture book that's associated with the story of him meeting John Muir, right? And going out to really talk, which started the conservation movement with the Sierra Club and the movement out west. And that's a huge piece. And there's been legends that have been written about that camping trip. And, and think about those two men and what has been an outcome now, and still a sustainable outcome: the Park Service, our public lands, and those conservation agencies such as the National Parks Conservation Association, the Sierra Club, all those other different pieces. There's two avenues that were built out of a conversation between two men out in the wild, because they loved the place. They loved it. It was beautiful. And they made both determined decisions to save it or protect it in their own way, one through the presidency and one through advocacy.
And the whole role of the media and promoting it. You have photographs. You had to convince people in Congress that this was worth it. And so using the media of the time, whether it was film or photographs or paintings or whatever, that was a powerful piece of accomplishing what they felt was important to accomplish.
Well, we're coming up on an hour. Anybody have any great last words? Parting thoughts?
Well, I would say not a lot of great last words, but I think we have some great resources. Our presidency conversation only adds to all of the fuel with all of the different faces here. And I think Keith or Kyle can explain a little bit more about that, but we've got resources to share too, including some links that were in our presentation. And I think that's one of the best parts, because now I want to go dive in now with all the comments that you all have made. You always make this conversation so much richer for me. I'm going to go dive into some of those links and start looking, because I think there's a real story behind this for students.
So I'll take that, Michelle. As I mentioned before, we've created a document, and we were actually recording this in advance of TLD a little bit. So we're probably going to have a very robust list by the time TLD actually comes around and you see this. So, but we've already collected probably, I think, about 100 resources around presidents and things we've used and effective things and lessons that have been built and books and deep dives at the Library of Congress. They have a lot of resource guides that are already built out with, you know, the curators and the archivists at the library have very detailed resource guides for pretty much all the presidential papers they hold, which is, you know, up to, I always get it wrong, up to, not Cleveland, I had it written down. Anyways, up into the 20th century, basically, into the early 20th century. And so there's tons of resources there at the Library of Congress. And we have links out to all sorts of things. And that will be linked with the video. And so you should be able, either if you haven't already, go ahead and open that up and start digging. So anything we talked about, we'll try to get it linked in there, as well as a bunch of stuff that we've not talked about. We've really only touched on, you know, 3 presidents here for the most part. So there's, you know, 40 plus more that you can go and start digging around and look at the resources you shared. And as I always tell everybody, whenever we do anything, it's like, you've got the opinions of just a couple people here and the experiences of us, but we'd also like to hear, you know, what you bring to the table. That's all about inquiry and the things we do. So if you know something or if this sparks something exciting, please share back with us, ping us, contact us here at the information we have. We're always excited to hear more, help you learn more, do more. And like I said, the TPS program is here to help these conversations and to use these primary sources and the resources from Library of Congress in your educational settings. And you just have to reach out for us. We'll mention it over and over again, but there's granting money available to do these things with your schools, districts, and other organizations. And so we're, like I said, we're here to help. That's why we put on this conference, is just to kind of get the word out. And I'll leave it at that. And if anybody else has any final words before we head out, we've really enjoyed having you join us here today, and we'll see you at some other things later in the week.
You have a great week coming up.
Yes, we do.
Good things are planned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
all.
you. Hop on.
Thanks,
Let's
everybody.
do this together.
Bye.